Hello and welcome to Outside In Selling. My name is Jack Malcolm, and my goal for this course, and I hope it's going to be your goal too, is to make you the most valued and most trusted salesperson that any of your customers have. What's that going to mean to you? It's going to mean higher revenues, improved margins, shorter sales cycles, and better long-term relationships with all your customers. Now, I also want you to keep in mind that this webinar is designed not to stand alone. You're going to get a lot out of it, but you'll get a lot more out of it if you do this in conjunction with the workbook that you will already have. And then, of course, this is going to set you up for the much more interactive live virtual training that we're going to do as a result of this. But now let's get back to value. What kind of value do you add to your customers? And I'm talking about the value that you bring to the transaction, not the value of your product or services brings. And that's going to be very important, but the value that you bring as a part of this entire buying experience that your customers have. We're going to talk about 4 levels of value, and we'll go through each one in detail, but first let me just name them. At the lowest level of value, we are selling a pure commodity. Now, we don't need to spend too much time on this, because if you're selling just based on price, you're really, A, you're not selling, and B, your sales career probably isn't going to last very long. So you don't even need this course at this level. At the next level up, you're focusing on the features and advantages of your product or service, and then helping the customer understand what benefit that brings to them. The next level of value up is something that is a term that we've all heard. We're probably going to look at some of the nuances of this, but it's solution selling. And solution selling, of course, is we're solving problems for customers. That is almost the highest level of value that you can bring, but there is one level even higher, and that's the consultative level. So let's explain what those things mean and where we go. First of all is, what do you need to be an expert in to be able to sell at these levels? At the commodity level, you just need to know your price list, and we're not adding a tremendous amount of value there, so enough said. At the feature advantage benefit level, you need to be an expert on your product. Now, is that bringing value to your customers? In some ways it is. If your customers are unfamiliar with the product or service, maybe they're a first-time buyer, they can probably benefit from you explaining what some of the differences are and why they need this or why they need that. But the problem, of course, is that customers have so much of this information at their fingertips through the internet that they sometimes know your product just as well as you do, and they may even know your competitors' products even better than you do. So if you're just competing at this level, you're not adding a tremendous amount of value. Where we start adding value and where we're going to focus on this course is the next 2 levels. At the solution level, you need to be an expert in another word that starts with the first 3 letters, PRO, and that is problem. Obviously, we're not just going in there and saying our solutions are blank, and we go in there and present the same old product and dress it up just by calling it a solution. What we truly need to be an expert in is the problems that our customers face. And not only that, but the processes that they use in order to make money, in order to add value to their customers, in order to produce whatever they're doing. They have certain processes, and we can touch certain of those processes, and we can have an impact on those processes, the nuts and bolts of how they do things on a daily basis. If we become experts in problems and processes, we are going to add a tremendous amount of value to customers. But there's still one level even higher, and that is the consultative level. What we need to do at this level is understand not only our product, not only the problems and processes that our customers face, but also how they use this to improve their business and personal outcomes in some way. And I use the term profit because this is the language that people at high levels understand. And speaking of the language that people understand, there's an old saying in sales that you get sent to who you sound like. So when you're talking about price, who are you going to get sent to? Obviously, procurement, the buyers, that's not where you want to be, and that's not where this course is designed to help you. This course will help you at the next level. When you're talking about your product, you're going to be sent to the users who will use your product and the people who own the processes that your product will be used in. And when I'm saying product, I'm also talking about service as well. So keep in mind that I'm using the term pretty broadly. At the next level up, when you're talking about problems and processes, you get sent to the problem owners, the people whose lives will be affected by solving that problem or by not solving that problem. And these people tend to be at the mid-level, the operational levels of organizations, and they can be very useful as champions for you. They can be very useful as influencers. Sometimes they're decision makers, but a lot of times the decision makers, and especially the approvers, are going to be at the highest level. And of course, we call that the C level. And at the C level, when you're talking about profits, you're talking about business, and you're talking about outcomes that people value, that is the type of language that you need to use when you're at that level. There's one final thing that I want to talk about here, is that there's a major difference between consultative selling and the 3 levels below. And that difference is that everything below the line here is actually driven by the customer. The customer says, hey, I want to buy 1,000 widgets, what's your best price? Or the customer says, I'm trying to decide whether this widget or that widget is the best. Can you come in and explain it to me? Customer says, hey, I have a problem which I think your widgets can solve. Come in and show me how you can solve it and how it can improve my processes. But that's because the customer knows about those. At the highest level, it's driven by the salesperson, because what we're doing is we're actually solving problems for customers that they don't even know they have yet. And if we can do that, we're adding a tremendous amount of value. So if you start selling at these levels, and by the way, let me make one important point here. I'm not saying you can only sell at consultative levels. I'm not saying you can only sell at solution levels. You're probably going to have to go up and down that pyramid, sometimes even in a single sales call or sales conversation. But the trick is that if you can sell at the highest levels, that means that you're also able to sell at the lower levels. But just because you can sell at the product level doesn't necessarily mean that you understand things about the customer. So the major difference then that your customers are going to see with the approach that we're going to focus on is, first of all, we're going to come in there and we're going to focus directly from their perspective. I call that outside-in thinking, and hence the name of this course, and that will make sense in just a minute. Second thing is, it requires preparation. You can't be an expert in your customers' business processes. You can't be an expert in how they make money without doing a lot of research, without doing a lot of learning, and without doing a lot of preparation. They're going to see a big difference in the professionalism that you bring to the table, and they're going to see you talking about the total solution, and you'll see what that means in the next module. It's also going to change your conversations in a way that you're going to do a lot less telling, you're going to do a lot less explaining, and you're going to do a lot more asking and getting them to talk about their business so that we can solve problems together. So let's just do a quick test here, and if you saw the workbook, you probably will not be surprised by this, but just in case, because I know everybody doesn't actually read these workbooks, even though it's a required part of the pre-work. Think for a second. All the assets that your company has, all the assets around the globe, you look around you, there's all kinds of assets. What's the most important asset that your company has? Now, if you're like most of the people in my classes, you probably answered people. And I get that answer 98% of the time. And I say, what people? And people say, us, the salespeople. And I agree, salespeople are important assets, and I know your companies always say that people are our greatest asset. But with all due respect, here's my answer. Customers. If you didn't say customers, let's stop and think what that means for a minute. You are the sales force. There is nobody in a company that should be more customer focused than you are, but very few times when I actually ask this question do I get that answer. And what that means to me is that people are not focusing from what I call outside-in thinking. Outside-in thinking is different from inside-out thinking. Outside-in thinking is looking at things from the customer's point of view. In scientific terms, it's called perspective taking. It's also called cognitive empathy. It's being able to see things from the customer's point of view. Now, all of us can engage in outside-in thinking when we put our minds to it, but very few of us do. And the reason is that we're selfish and we're lazy. And that's not a value judgment, that's a statement of fact. Our minds have evolved through evolution to look after ourselves, so of course we look at the world through our own selfish reasons, and our minds have evolved to use as little energy as possible. So we're going to go with our default thinking in most cases. But outside-in thinking is about putting yourself in the other person's point of view, seeing things from their point of view, and it's something that we can all do as long as we're reminded of it. So this means instead of starting from the inside out and saying, here's my product and let me tell you how great it is, and giving a data dump of all the features and benefits that we have, is that we start our conversations by indicating that we care about the customer, by having the right intent, by asking them questions to get them engaged in the conversation, to get them to want to share what's going on in their world and to share some of the problems and some of the issues they're dealing with. And then we work together to collaborate. So you probably have seen hopefully it hasn't been when you yourself do it, but you've probably seen salespeople that come in and seem to be very focused on just making the sale. Outside-in thinking is the opposite. In fact, let's take a look at some of the differences here, as you can see on the screen. With inside-out thinking, we talk a lot more. Outside-in thinking, we listen more. The same message works for everybody with inside-out thinking. It's kind of like sending a love letter saying to whom it may concern. But for outside-in thinking to work, you need a customized message because they need to see that it has been written specifically for them. Instead of focusing on the product or service, we're going to be focused on the outcome of using our product or service. We go in with a different mindset. Instead of saying, what can I sell in this meeting? How can I help in this meeting? What can I get out of this versus what can I give to the other person? And by the way, it's okay to give because you will get in return. And I'm not saying that we wave the white flag and we surrender our interests. In fact, outside-in thinking is the best way to get what we want, but we'll see as we go. When we talk about negotiations in a later version of this course, the inside-out thinker goes in there and says, how can I slice the pie and get a bigger slice than the other person? The outside-in thinker says, how can I make the pie bigger so that I get a bigger chunk and they get a bigger chunk at the same time and both people are happy? With inside-out thinking, we always want to try to sound smart. With outside-in thinking, we want to make the other person look smart. Inside-out thinking is all about the golden rule, and nothing wrong with the golden rule, but the golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The platinum rule, on the other hand, says, do unto others as they would be done unto. In other words, people do things for their reasons, not yours, and everybody's different. So some of the things that you think are important may not be important to them. So we need to think from their point of view. Now, the catch to all this is that inside-out thinking, as we said, is pretty easy. It's because it comes naturally to us. Outside-in thinking is a skill that takes work. It takes work, but fortunately, because it's a skill, that's a skill that we're going to work on in here and how we're going to improve it. And that's what's going to set us apart and make us much more valuable to our customers than anybody else they deal with, because we're going to be better outside-in thinkers. Next thing is we need to be better prepared. We need to plan. Why do we need to do it? And you probably see these reasons on the screen and agree with them, but we have to go over them one by one because, trust me, as a salesperson myself, I know how important it is, but I also have to remind myself almost every single time that I need to do an opportunity plan or call plan, because it's not something that we like to do. We'd rather be schmoozing, we'd rather wing it, we'd rather go out there and talk to customers. But if we take the time to prepare and we take the time to plan, number one, we need it because it's going to help us focus. It's going to force us into outside-in thinking. Number two, it's going to take some time up front, but it will save time in the end. 3, it's going to avoid mistakes. 4, There's just some sort of power in having written goals. And when you have written goals, you tend to accomplish a lot more in sales calls. And finally, probably the most important of all, is your customer is going to notice. And when we're talking about complex, large ticket system sales, which is really what this course is designed to do, your customers are going to look at every single reason they can to lower the risk and to increase the trust of the people that they deal with. And by noticing your preparation and your planning and your professionalism, that's going to go a huge way towards increasing trust. So here's an agenda going forward for the course. The introduction, we are at the end of the introduction right now. In the next section, we're going to look at the solution value worksheet, and that's a way to help us get our heads around and get down on paper what are all the differences between our product or service and any competing alternatives they might have, and then connecting those differences to meaningful outcomes for your customers. That's going to help us find a tremendous amount of value that we may have been leaving on the table. So solution value worksheet is going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to require a little bit of work, but you're going to get a lot out of it. Then once we have the solution value worksheet, we need to figure out how best to sell it to the customer. You probably figured out already that we don't want to come in and do a data dump. We don't want to tell them how great we are. We want them to discover for themselves how great we are. And we do that through a questioning process called situation, conflict, and resolution that's embedded into an effective sales conversation. That's going to require sales call planning. And once we put all that together, we're going to be in great shape, but the customer is still going to have some objections. So we're going to talk about ways that we can manage those objections. There will be other additions to this course depending on what your company has decided to include in this course, but this is the basic agenda and we're going to get started with it. So if you're ready, let's get ready for round 2.